Dojo.live. I am Tulio Siragusa, broadcasting from Southern California. Today is Thursday, January 7th, 2021, excuse me.
Yeah.
Welcome back. And this is the last show of the week, and I'm joined by my co-host, Carlos Ponce, who is in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Hi, Carlos.
Hey, Tulio.
And we have our guest today, which is why we do this to begin with, Anisha Patel, who is with Cisco. Hi, Anisha. Welcome. I know you're broadcasting from Santa Clara, California.
Hi, Tulio. Hi, Carlos. Nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
Absolutely.
So we're looking forward to speaking with you today, especially about customer success. That's an area that's near and dear to me personally, and many of us, and many of the audience members. At the end of the day, we're all in business to serve customers, right? So the success of that relationship is paramount to the success of any business. But before we go into that topic and learn about your experiences in that space, let's get to know you a little bit. If you don't mind, please give us a little background about you. Tell us a little bit about who Anisha is.
Oh, sure. Happy to. So I think, as you mentioned, Anisha Patel, coming from Santa Clara, California. My role currently is at Cisco. I'm the Senior Director of the Customer Success Management team. What that really means is that I lead the customer success model and motion that we've been implementing at the Cisco broad corporate level over the last 2 years. My background prior was in consulting at the very beginning at companies like IBM and EY. I was at Salesforce prior to this role, where I got to see the customer success model as it was in some ways invented, and now getting the opportunity to come to Cisco to lead the transformation as we're trying to bring customer success as a mindset, a culture, and then process into the company here across all our products and services.
Excellent, amazing background. I was ex-Big Four myself. Spent a little time out of EY myself, so I know the kind of environment you came from. That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about. Everybody knows who Cisco is, but tell us a little bit about your role at Cisco, if you don't mind, and specifically what areas you work with.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And I think a lot of people know Cisco, but it's funny, even when I talk to people and when I joined Cisco, people were like, they do customer success. I thought they sell routers and switches. So I think there's the legacy perception of what Cisco is, right? Which is definitely their bread and butter around, networks, routers, switches, technology there. But Cisco has transformed pretty significantly just in the breadth of what they cover now, right? So we're definitely in our core still of enterprise networking, but we have quite a few products now in the security side, collaboration, right? People forget WebEx is actually a Cisco product now. Data center, automation, Internet of Things. So it's a pretty wide set of products, and also a wide set of people at a customer perspective that we have to now interface with in terms of lines of business, in terms of the context or key personas that really can adopt our technology and get the value. And so my role at Cisco specifically was, how do we think about customer success in a world that isn't single product? How do we think about it in a space where the customer itself might be, any number of companies, but there's many, many BUs within that customer that you have to engage with, many different personas that you have to engage with, and how do you do it in a way that's consistent? Because the beauty of Cisco is that it does have a lot to offer. It's also our downfall at times, because a lot of the products we've purchased have come in through acquisition. People don't see them as one company. And the charter of customer success now is, how do you get one person who comes in and helps you adopt across that whole suite and get a consistent experience from one company that then helps and maps to each of those products or technologies.
Well, we're looking forward to speaking with you, Anisha. It's certainly a bigger challenge, I think, having lived it, serving very large enterprise clients who do have multiple business units, multiple stakeholders, multiple decision makers, multiple kingdom owners, let's call them that way, who need to be served. Yeah. And it's sometimes a lot easier when you're a startup and you just got one specific segment. So there's a lot we can learn from organizations such as yours on how to be adaptable and diverse in dealing with various types of clients. So let's go right into it. Carlos, what's the topic today and the conversation we're having? Let's kick it off.
Absolutely, Tulio. Thank you. And thanks, of course, to our guest, Anisha, for being with us. Tulio, today we're going to be speaking, as chosen by Anisha, about customer experience, the new era of customer success. And we're going to be discussing how delivering true customer success goes beyond any specific function and requires company-wide transformation. So that's what we're going to be speaking about today. Now, Anisha, first of all, why did you choose this particular topic, and did you feel it was relevant for today's day and age in technology?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, one of the things that I noticed is, even in the last 2 years, when we were at Salesforce, we used to call this the group that does customer success or the CX type functions, it was called CSG, so Customer Success Group. Mm-hmm. And what you're finding in the market now is more and more it's moving into CX. So if you look up customer experience or CX, just the sheer number of companies that have introduced a CX organization or used the CX brand in the last 2 years has skyrocketed. And what I think it's been an indicator of is that customer success for the longest time, somewhat understood, right? You think about the customer success manager, they come in just like an account manager, and after someone has purchased the product, they're there to help you and guide you through the product experience and how to get you to adopt it as quickly as possible. But what I think there's an appreciation in the market for more and more now is it doesn't just start or end with, hiring a bunch of CSMs to come in and drive adoption. It's actually, how do you transform the overall experience that your customer has with you as a company? And it starts from the point of evaluating products on the sales side down into then the adoption process, back into the renewal, and then back and forth. And we actually call it the life cycle. We almost call it the racetrack. It's like an infinity loop within Cisco. That is, how do you keep our customers going through that racetrack as quickly as possible? And how do you get them through all those stages of the life cycle? In order for customer success to really be successful in a company, especially at the size of Cisco, we're starting to really see and appreciate that it's not any one team that actually drives customer success. It's the company that drives customer success. And so it's less about it being a function or a role or even a process, but it's becoming a cultural shift that every part of the organization has to adapt to if you really want to make that change on the CX side and really the customer experience that they perceive.
Okay, thank you, Anisha.
So
Tulio, back to you.
Let's talk about a little bit of that. You talked about company-wide transformation. Today, most organizations have a function, right? It's a customer success function. It's separate. Its job is to sort of take the baton once sales has onboarded a client and run with it. But sometimes some organizations don't plan out the setting up of the success client from the very get-go because there's this disconnection between these two groups. When you say transformation, how have you guys broken through that barrier? The demarcation between sales and the handoff to customer success, and actually made it an initiative from the beginning to end. Has that happened, beginning to end? How is that working?
Yeah, and I would say it's still a journey we're on. 2 years later, I think we're much farther along, obviously, than whenever we started. But it's a great question, Tulio, because when you think about, it kind of depends where you start with a company, right? In a company like Cisco, you have to think about the history, which was we sold hardware, right? The idea of customer success wasn't ingrained in that kind of business, right? You sell a box, you come back 2-3 years and say, hey, I have a newer box that has a better, let's refresh your hardware and just buy a new box. But whether you use the old box or not was really not something we worried about. It was a sell and then come back to sell again. When you're now moving into a recurring revenue model, which is what the big transformation just broadly Cisco is going through, right? Half of our products, especially in security and collaboration that we've purchased through acquisition, do have the software recurring revenue model, right? Things like Duo and WebEx are all license-based. They have 1 year, 3 year, 5 year renewals. And now you're thinking less about here's the box and I'll come back in 3 years. It's here's the licenses. I have to help make sure you're getting value from them because you won't renew otherwise. And the transformation at Cisco that we went through, and when we entered and the CX organization was formed, we looked at actually what does that journey of a customer look like, right? So when they're evaluating a product, what are the things that they need? When they're selecting the product, what are they thinking about? When they actually purchase, now what's the expectation? Then they're onboarding on the product, they're implementing it, right? They start to really use them and adopt it. As you go through each of those kind of stages of what that life cycle looks like, kind of choosing, using, loving is kind of what we call it. What is it that the customer needs from us? And how much of that was already being serviced by people like sales that existed today versus actually we had gaps. And that's when you start to recognize, hey, our salespeople at that time were doing a little bit of everything, right? They were kind of dabbling into customer success because in order to get people to buy again or choose again, they had to get some sense of using, loving, and renewing to happen. And the challenge is when you tend to be, spread across all things, you tend to not be as good at any one thing. And so part of the journey we went on was how do we actually bring in roles like the customer success roles, like the renewals roles, who are dedicated to some of these functions? And then how do we help sales now accept that there are other people coming in, not to take over their account, right? Not to change that accountability, but to be there to support them so that they can actually go back to the function that they were really hired in, and their bread and butter really is, right? Which is the selling of the products or services themselves.
It's
Anisha,
interesting. Go ahead, Carlos.
I'm sorry, Tilio. Anisha, got a quick question. You mentioned, and I like to stop right there because I think it deserves some elaboration. You mentioned company-wide transformation. Now, I can understand how it would be much easier to accomplish this maybe at a small scale or at a small organization. But I mean, Cisco is a huge company. So where do you see, in larger companies, where do you see the largest resistance to this type of company-wide collaboration or transformation in order to build up the customer success mindset?
Yeah, it's a good call out. So what we basically did, and I think what made it effective at Cisco, is when Chuck brought in Maria Martinez to run the CX organization, he also brought in Jerry Elliott to run the sales organization. And one of the things that he did when he brought those two leaders in is had them aligned at the hip on what it really means to do sales versus CX and what does that life cycle look like. Because I think, Carlos, you're absolutely right. Even with that alignment, you still have, the trickle down as you work your way down the organization, people who are skeptical, right? We always talk about the transformation as you have the maybe 20 or 30% who upfront are the early adopters, think that there's value in this and jump on board. You have maybe the 50% sitting in the middle that are neutral, kind of holding out and seeing, okay, is it going to go? Is it going to last? Is it not? And then you have the 20% who maybe are, the non-believers on, is this really something that we need to do? I don't think it has necessarily the legs to be a long-term thing versus a short-term initiative. And what that alignment allowed us to do is at least move a lot of, have that strong 30% who early adopted and got into the boat. You have the 50% who are more willing to now be open to the idea and learn about it. But it started kind of one with the alignment at the leadership level, right? They were all preaching the same message of customer lifecycle is something we have to think about. It's something every organization owns. And now each of us have a part to play in it, right? Sales, your part to play in it now is less about solving the escalations. You're going to have somebody come in to do that. But your job now is more about sell business value and articulate and capture that business value in a way that can go to your counterparts so that they're not spending the first 30% of their time trying to figure out who's the person I need to talk to drive adoption. What was the reason they purchased this? What were their intentions so that I can actually help them with that? So a big part of the transformation for us, and the only way you make it work in a bigger organization, is having that messaging and alignment, I think, at the executive level. And then at each level, really helping them understand how does it help them, right? We spent a lot of time on messaging on what does this do for you, right? Like in sales, the first reaction is, why do I have more people coming into my account? I own the account. And so kind of taking it from meet them where they are and then show them the value of somebody coming in means you have now 20% more time to sell. But here's the small catch, right? You need to spend an extra 2% of your time going and capturing some of this information and sharing with them what you know so that they can be effective in helping you in driving some of those other activities.
Thank you, Anisha.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of challenges in tackling this, right? You made very clear there's a difference between a transactional sale and a relationship-based sale. The box is either on or off, right? So There's no process for adoption and there's no curve to adoption in a box. It's either on or off. So it's a very different life cycle and sales cycle. Now, what's interesting is a lot of organizations would love to be able to achieve this level of intimacy with their clients where there's no sort of a handoff that happens between the people who initially started the relationship and those folks who are managing the day-to-day. but there's often been misalignment in the compensation models, right? Because unfortunately, that does drive behavior, right?
Yep.
So if I'm sales and I'm managing a relationship, I'm not going to be incentivized to continue to add value if the commission cuts off after a period of time because now someone else is getting it. So how have you guys tackled that challenge? Is
Yeah,
that because
it's a
that's a
perfect
big
call out.
challenge, right?
Yeah, and that's the perfect call. And I would say this is where I think a company like Cisco struggles, and where, you know, smaller companies or companies who are newer in the market have a much faster mover kind of advantage on us, which is, you know, Cisco's in a place where we didn't capture the concept of new versus renew, right? We had to go back even in the data to be able to say what of our install base is actually renewals versus not, to even be able to get to that kind of compensation. And so we're getting there now. But the answer to your question, Julio, is, you know, sales was very much focused on new pipeline, right? New deals, like no surprise there. What the shift that we're trying to make now is start to hold them onto ARR growth, so annual recurring revenue. So it's not just about the company and growing net new business, it's also retaining the base. And what you end up finding is over time, that will catch up to you if you're not driving the right behavior, right? Because your ARR, let's say, with this account, is $100 million. If that customer is not happy, they're going to lose whatever, 20 million, 30 million of that number. That's that much more you now have to sell to a customer who's less inclined to buy from you because of their perception and the value, the lack of value that they perceive from that 20, 30 million. And so it makes it not a direct shift, right? You don't want them to start going into customer success, which is kind of the balance, right? You start holding them to things like adoption. They'll say, okay, well then how do I do it? You have to craft the compensation to say your job is net new for sure, but it's also overall growth. And then the way that you construct the percentages of that allocation then allow you to say, as a salesperson, okay, I have to focus on growth, which means I have to enable the people around me and empower them to help me with that piece because it affects my comp, while I spend a lot of my time on then the hunting, the piece that I'm really accountable for and that I'm the only person across the company now focused on, right? Or now comped on. And then from our customer success perspective, we do a similar thing, right? We hold them on things like health score, which is it's a metric we create internally that captures, you know, usage and adoption. So we look at the feature usage and we try to tie that more, not to just have you, used your licenses, have you downloaded them? It's actually what features are you using in the product that we know indicate value in terms of achievement of use cases. And that health score then gives us a leading indicator that, hey, we are driving adoption in a way that we know 80, health score of 80 means high stickiness and high likelihood to renew and grow. And then we hold our CSEs or our customer success folks on retention then. So the renewal rate alignment is there. So they're basically helping sales with the retention part of their ARR growth number. Sales is now focused on the incremental piece that's growing the number. And then it becomes hopefully, over time, a very strong partnership and an appreciation that they both bring valuable things to the table.
Now, Anisha, I'm curious, have you guys also adopted tiers of customers? That's one way a lot of organizations try to address this, right? And it's like, do we treat every client the same way, or do we tier them based on strategic importance, based on potential for growth, sheer size of the companies? There's a number of factors that determine those tiers, whether they're major accounts, national accounts, strategic accounts. And obviously, those different tiers got different attention. Yeah. That's been the traditional norm of dealing with some of this. Have you guys adopted some of that, or anything new that you're doing that you've tried that's worked well, that hasn't worked well? Love to hear some of the use cases that you guys have attempted to work through that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're trying something we've never tried before. It wasn't something that we brought from the Salesforce model. Basically, we're doing the what you would expect, right? What the market does at the highest end, which is, above a certain threshold of spend, a customer gets a dedicated resource, right? Like the traditional customer success manager, who's focused on the account, right? Owns a couple of these accounts and is responsible for driving full adoption across the spectrum. One of the things we've also added to the model, just given Cisco's complexity and breadth, is a technical specialist on the adoption side that customer success manager can pull in. And the reason for that is, you can only be an expert on so much or know so much about the overall technology. But if you think about, now if a customer starts asking you about enterprise networking and then asking you about security the next day, they may need a specialist to come in and help answer those questions at a level of depth that would be meaningful. But then on the scale side, so below that threshold, we actually don't do dedicated assignment at all. And it's a pretty high bar. We're only talking about maybe the top 500, 1,000 customers that we're covering with dedicated account coverage. And the model that we're trying, below that, which is, lots of customers for Cisco, is what we're calling a program-based approach. And so the way that we like to talk about it is it's a digitally led and then human-supported motion. So if we can get really crisp with our sales teams about, customer bought WebEx, bought Duo, bought, AMP for Endpoint for a specific use case, what do they need now to achieve that? So if we get that captured from sales up front, my email to you isn't just welcome to WebEx, it's welcome to WebEx. I know that you're trying to use it for large scale meetings and events. Here are the specific ways that you think we should configure this product now so that you can actually get the most value. So the emails get much more targeted when you know the intent. And then when customers get stuck, what we do is we have triggers that then go to our teams, our pooled resource teams that are now coming in. So think of almost like our customer success resources below that line are like a SWAT team. Kind of think of almost like the adoption SWAT team that comes in saying, hey, I know that you're starting to get stuck. I'm seeing that you're slower than the average customer in this kind of space and how fast you're moving. Can I get you some help? And they're usually given a very prescriptive view of, we know that these features help you get to the next stage. So here are the assets or resources we'd recommend. And what that allows us to do is the more prescriptive we get, the more scalable it is, because otherwise you'd have to hire hundreds of those people as well in order to cover every technology. So you have to figure out a way to make that prescriptive enough so that they don't have to be an expert on every single Cisco product to be able to know enough about the technology, know what to recommend, and get them pointed to the right expert or the right resource to get them through that hump or resolving that adoption barrier that they've encountered.
So historically, the adoption of shared service models for the bottom layer of the accounts, right, has not been an exact science, right? Sometimes you end up with some key accounts in that shared service model that had great potential, but don't get served very well. So that was before AI, before we had technology to get smarter about identifying patterns and customer usage to begin to see the potential, even down to the lower level, 500,000, whatever many accounts fit into that model. Have you guys looked at and invested in those kinds of initiatives to get smarter about how to serve that large, broad spectrum of clients that don't get the dedicated support?
Yeah, and that's exactly, it's perfect that you said that, because that's exactly the big pilot or test we're doing right now is exactly on that, right? Which is, we right now have a pooled resource model. So if I say, I'll take the example of Canada, we have, these success program managers is the role that we call it, who are now focused on helping make Canada successful below that line, right? And one of the things that we're now working through is it really just anybody, if your customer is stuck, anybody in that pool actually go talk to that customer, or when they're in that bucket, right, because they're just missing the threshold, that there should be some logic of, well, you'll usually get Anisha or Tulio, one of the two. So there's some recency in how it's done, even if we're not assigned. So a lot of that is the intelligence of the platforms, and we've made massive platform investment to back up what we're trying to do from a model standpoint. But that's exactly how we've built the logic. So the logic will say, okay, for customers of a given size, even if they're below the line, the first thing we look at is recency. Who was the last person who talked to them in the last 3 months or 6 months? If that person has availability, let's take it there. And if not, then we'll go take it to a backup. But that way there's some customer recency. And there's been studies done that have actually shown that when you go and survey those customers afterwards, as long as you have the right person coming with the right information, they don't actually worry so much about the fact that the person's dedicated to them or not, because they feel like the experience itself is still sufficient to get them what they need. And that customer recency of at least seeing at least Anisha or Tulio each time is good enough for them, even if it's not my dedicated person.
So this has been great. Learning a lot in terms of what you guys are trying, and big cultural shift, right? A lot of organizations are either engineering driven or sales driven or customer service driven. Cisco historically has been a sales-driven type of organization, right?
Yeah,
That's been the
absolutely.
culture. Now there's this shift towards a customer success-driven culture while still maintaining growth, right? So how has that impacted the culture internally in the organization? How are people adopting to this new change? Any resistance? Any things that's any programs that you guys have tried that have worked to get people more thinking along the lines of shifting towards customer success versus just sales?
Yeah, and it's a process or a journey, I would say. So we had a lot of resistance, I'll say, in the first 6 months to a year, because a company like Cisco too has been pretty stable. And when you think about the workforce too, a lot of people have been there, 10, 20 years. And so a lot of it is there is a stability that is welcomed and appreciated there. And when you're coming in with a disruption this large, it can be daunting. And it's meant more with, I think, skepticism than anything else, which is this really something we need to do? Because we haven't had to do it, right? And so I think the way that we've done the cultural piece is a lot of the first year of CX was tons of messaging, right? It was almost like certifying everyone within CX to first say, do you know how to tell the story about why this is important and why we need to pay attention to this transformation and why the company needs to get ahead of it, and putting it in the language of, it may not matter right now, you're still selling a lot of boxes, but in 2-3 years, you're going to have to sell a lot of software subscriptions. And are you ready and prepared for that? And do you, don't get left behind, basically, is kind of the way you messaged that in terms of why it's important. We're trying to keep that competitive advantage. The second thing that we ended up finding was very helpful is you find your ambassadors, and you don't find them just within the CX organization, you find them across the company. And we had a couple of folks either within CX who then ended up moving back to sales, or people in sales who really just believe in the model. And it's amazing what it does, because oftentimes what you also find is people don't want to hear the message from us. CX going around telling sales or the product organizations why CX is important can only be so effective. But when you have sales telling sales, hey, this is really great, this helped me. We've done a lot on capture the success stories. They started as moments of success. We said even like the littlest things, let's capitalize on those. Now we have enough of them, which is full out success stories, right? Customers who want to advocate for Cisco because of the experience they had. But having those account managers tell their own peers why this was great, or having initiatives where our own sales teams have actually said, look, we want the value of CX, so we're going to go document these things. So one of the things they're doing now in Salesforce is before they close a deal, they actually want to require that they give us the outcome that the customer purchased the product for, so that we don't have to go hunting for it after the fact. We actually get that information from day one in CX.
Right.
And so those are some of the ways that we have found that you find the ambassadors and the people that people do believe and trust and have the credibility for, and you really help them be that platform or voice for you to try and change that culture.
Excellent strategy. Go ahead, Carlos. I think you have a question. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, Tulio. I had lost the feeling of the mute part. That was my trademark, Anisha, just for the record. Anisha, we're coming up on time, but before we go, there's something that I would like to ask you.
Yeah,
And this is like beyond the customer experience, or even maybe even the topic itself, and more focused on Cisco as a company. And this is because a lot of the folks out there who might be watching might be even interested in looking at Cisco as an opportunity for employment and that kind of situation. So in that context, what would you say that makes Cisco a great place to work, or what sort of traits does the company have that would lure everyone that might want to work for Cisco? What makes it a great place to work for?
Yeah, it's a question that's hard to answer in a minute. I'll do a quick overview.
But whatever your heart feels. So no worries.
I honestly think Cisco is probably one of the best companies I've worked for from a culture standpoint. And I think it's because there's a lot of companies that have a lot of values that they list out. I really feel like our leadership lives those values, right? I even think about through the pandemic and how Chuck has been, he's been doing monthly, sometimes even more frequent check-ins with the organization, right? When a lot of the events of the last year, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it comes to, even yesterday's events, he's done a lot to, immediately respond, do check-ins to see how the people are, and have very open dialogue. And I think just creating this environment where, look, we are supported in this company, and we go beyond just the work, right? He's given days off during COVID because he recognizes that there is challenges with working from home all the time when you have life right behind you, right? And so I think the company, I've always thought highly of it. I saw a lot of it in practice over the last 9 to 12 months that make it a great place to work. And I just feel like it's a company that's really trying to get to being better, right? There's this constant focus on how do we do better? How do we get to the next place? How do we keep ourselves relevant, but also how do we innovate, not just for, like survival, but purely because it is the best thing to do for our customers. And I think the pure investment they've made in CX in the last 2 years is a huge testament to that. People who want to be part of it, we're hiring a ton of people in customer success right now. The massive investment went in this year. And so I feel very grateful to work for a company that feels like it also cares as much as it speaks the language. It actually walks the talk as well.
Great.
Well,
Thank you so much, Anisha.
It's been great to have you. We're going to definitely recap this show on Monday at 12 noon. That's when we do the recap show. But there's some key things that I learned that are very clear, at least from our conversation. Number one, you've got to create a culture where you care about people and live the talk, not just talk, walk the walk. And that enables people to feel supported to go ahead and make the changes. The other thing I heard is take the time to invest in evangelizing the change you're about to make, right? Don't just jump right into it. Don't do a surgical change. Take the time to educate and evangelize why it's important. And finally, get ambassadors who will be empowered to be the ones who are the cadre for the change instead of pushing it down. So great for you to share that with us. Thank you for joining us. Just stay with us as we wrap up. Carlos, what do we got coming up next week besides the recap show on Monday?
Yeah, besides the recap show, thank you, Tulio. We got 2 shows confirmed. Just for the record, Tulio, because they're very recent, they just came in to date. I mean, the confirmation, they're not there on the website yet. I haven't uploaded the landing pages, but I can tell you, Tulio, that on Tuesday, we are going to be speaking with Michael Zwickbaum, the CEO of Wisdom Gaming Group. And also on Thursday, we're going to be speaking with Costa Sauzis. I hope I got their last names correctly. Yeah, both of them. And he's the CEO of Net Data. So these are technology companies. Of course, the first one is a gaming company. The second one, I don't have a lot of information, in all honesty, Tulio, but it should be as interesting as ever because that's the only type of shows we do here in Dojo Live. They're all tech relevant. They're all tech related, and we're always interview the movers and shakers of the tech world. So that's what we have today. Next week, Tulio, right here on Dojo Live at noon Pacific.
Great. We will also have one Wednesday morning with Ally, but we'll update the announcement Monday at noon. Thanks for joining us.